I drove over from Netheravon on a blazing June day, and my first port of call was at the keeper's cottage. The keeper on this particular length of the Itchen is a Netheravon man, Len Bishop, and he's been here some years now, and obviously gets the greatest pleasure out of his job. He's an extremely enthusiastic man, very, very keen about all aspects of his work on the river. Well, he took me forward to see Mrs. Bishop, whom I've met before when I've been fishing on this particular water, and she's extremely proud of the flowers in her garden. It's rather interesting to note that amongst all the cultivated flowers there were also some wild flowers, which are called at about this time, and the bees already busy, that lovely buzzing noise that you hear that tells you that summer has really come. They have some wildflowers growing in the garden because they happen to be fond of them, flowers like the campion here, which many people would probably dismiss as weeds, but what after all is a weed? If it has a beautiful flower, then it has its own merit. There too, the lily of the valley was in bloom. This is one of my favourite flowers with its gorgeous scent. And the keeper showed me an ancient fly book that he'd come by. Obviously, probably best part of 100 years old, because H.S. Hall invented the eyed fly during the last century, and all these flies were obviously pre that date, when they were the tippet of golden pheasant by the look of it. Now, on a hot day like this, you don't really expect very good fishing. A lot of birds, I noticed, were very, very tame on that lawn, the tamest of all being the thrush, and she had some young in the hedge nearby. As I was saying, on a blazing June day like that, you don't expect much fly, and consequently, only in water of the very highest quality can you hope to enjoy dry fly fishing, because without the fly to bring them up, there's not likely to be many trout actually rising. Now, I think it's wonderful the way the swallows and the house martins long ago learned that you can't make bricks without straw. So they pick up the bits of straw and grass before they go to collect the damp mud down by the river itself. And from that they make their nests, the martins under the eaves of houses and the swallows on the beams in the farm barns. Both species were very, very busy on this particular morning as we made our way down to the bottom boundary just to take a look at the river at this point and to get the sniff and feel of it. I wanted to see if there were any fish up on the fin yet. Of course, at this time of the year there's a tremendous lot to see on the river, and a lot of the river birds have their young just now, among them the coot. And the young coots have little red heads, quite unlike the bald white patch, or the seemingly bald white patch of the parent birds. The parent birds just now very, very glossy black indeed, and the white patch on the forehead standing out in sharp contrast. Always amusing to watch coots diving, I think. They don't seem to stay down very long. They go down and collect bits of soft weed on which they feed the young. And the first trout already on the fin, as fly fishers say. By that we mean sitting up high in the water, watching for the first duns of the day to come down over them. And when there are duns like that on the water, there's a reasonable hope that trout will take both them and the artificial with which I simulate them, my imperial, that little dry fly which I nearly always use when I go dry fly fishing on a chalk stream anyway. And sure enough, it didn't take very long to interest the first trout. Straight away I realized that this fish was a young fish, a fish not yet at the standard, at the point where we would consider him to be of takeable size. A fish perhaps of about 14 ounces. He'd be quite respectable on many waters, but here considered of no account. So I damped my hand carefully not to burn him, gently release the fly, and as soon as I possibly can, quietly put the fish into the water, head upstream, and let him go. Probably very little the worse for the experience. And about the damp water meadows on either side of the river, the lapwings had their young. 3 or 4 in most cases where they hadn't been taken by predators. And of course the young lapwings a little bit perplexed, and all the time the parent birds circling overhead, calling to them, warning them that there was somebody about and that they'd better keep still, because that at this stage is probably their best defense. That one I thought was a bit too inquisitive for his own good. You have to be patient on a chalk stream, especially on a hot day, and you have to watch the beat very, very carefully for the first signs of a rising fish. You don't cast until you've actually seen the fish rise and break surface, and you try and mark his position as exactly as you can, approach him very carefully, taking care not to get too close, throw a fairly long line, and try and put the fly a few inches in front of him. Float it gently over his nose. And if you do this gently and accurately, there's a good chance that he'll take. Sure enough, this one was a better fish, and as itching fish do, he caught powerfully, lashing about on the surface in a quite acrobatic sort of way. This is a different behaviour from that of some other chalk stream fish, who tend to dive down into the weed when they are hooked. These itching fish are gentlemanly fighters, and they nearly always fight it out on the surface, laying down there, same colour in many respects as the buttercups, and every bit as beautiful. The flies hatching these days were blue-winged olives. This is probably the commonest of all our river flies, and these flies take shelter in the bankside herbage, and there they are sought by, amongst other birds, the young grey wagtails, which I noticed all the way along the river. The grey wagtail with the beautiful lemon-coloured breast, a bird which many people mistakenly call the yellow wagtail. The yellow wagtail is a quite different bird, a summer migrant, and yellow all over pretty well. A lot of these birds take these blue and olive duns as they shelter in the herbage before undergoing the final transformation, which will take them to their adult and mating stage. It's a delicate pastime, dry fly fishing, extremely exacting, especially in these conditions. You dare not make any mistakes at all, otherwise your fish is gone before you can ever drop the fly over his nose. But what rewarding fish these itching fish are to catch. The first one I kept was 1 pound 2 ounces, and the second almost its direct twin, deep and thick and as fat as butter. Perhaps the most characteristic bird on this whole stretch was a bird at first sight just like a house sparrow, but with what looked like a clerical collar round his neck. And this is the little bird sometimes called the reed sparrow, the reed bunting, the bird I call typical of this beautiful stretch of the Itchen. Well into the afternoon, I managed to hook my best fish of the day. He was a bit of a teaser because he was lying tight under some overhanging grasses right under the far bank. This is very often the sort of place that a good trout chooses to lie, and it takes just a little bit of care to make the fly come down without fouling the grasses so that the fish is able to take it. And of course it had been very warm work under the hot sun. And now, late in the afternoon, the fly had ceased to hatch, and fish had ceased to move. It was clear to me, indeed, that that was probably the end of sport for the day. And as I never fish in the evening myself, it was time to go home. A glimpse of an eel under the bank as I made my way back down the beat to the hut where the keeper, Len Bishop, was awaiting my return. And I was extremely glad to see him, because when he emerged from the hut, I noticed he was carrying a bottle of cool ale, and there was nothing I fancied more after my labour in the sunshine. So, in exchange for this very comforting pot, I handed over to Keeper Len Bishop the fruits of my own toil, and he, for his part, laid them out on the grass so that he could appraise the fish I had taken this day. 3 booties, between 1 pound 2 and £1 6 ounce.